This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 397, Semantic Versioning. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about semantic versioning with Mike Miles. Mike Miles is a highly skilled web engineer with 18 plus years of experience in open source development. Proficient in a variety of languages and frameworks, he has been contributing to Drupal since 2008 and leads the Boston Drupal meetup. As the director of web development at MIT Sloan, Mike manages the development, maintenance, and growth of digital properties, leading a team of developers to deliver high-quality solutions for the school's community. Mike's deep technical knowledge and experience drive innovation and advance MIT Sloan's digital presence. Mike, welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Happy to be here.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us from Atten Design Group, a senior developer, Jordan Graham. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. Nick Laughlin, co-founder of Enlightened Development. How are you?
I'm good. I'd love to know who my other co-founder is, but it's news to me, but glad to be here.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's founder of Enlightened Development. Sorry, I just dropped a co in there for some reason. I don't know. Sometimes I think Katako could be a co-founder. He
Possibly.
Feels like a valuable part of the Enlightened Development team.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to our module of the week. Let's bring in Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a growing number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. This week, I thought we would talk about Same Page Preview, which shows your content authors what their content will look like while they're creating it. It was actually created in February 2023, so just a couple of months ago, actually during the contribution sprint at Florida Drupal Camp. Currently, the most recent version is a 2.0.0 Alpha 3, and it is definitely in active development. There are currently 50 open issues, although only 17 of those are for the 2.x branch, and 3 of those are bugs. And it is currently in use by 3 sites. Also of note, the module was created by Chris Weber, Brian Perry, and Ofer Shaul, all of whom have been guests on this podcast. Now, the way the module works is it really leverages the preview capability that's built into Drupal core, but a lot of people don't seem to really be using very much. The module actually sort of adds an interactive wrapper around core's preview so that authors can see the preview while they're working on their content. So when an author moves focus between fields, the preview updates automatically, and then that gives them that sense of seeing the content really take shape without having to save and sort of see that preview in a separate screen. The title field actually will update while they're typing, so kind of giving that live preview sense. But it's really the only field right now that works that way, just because it's one of the more predictable fields in terms of how the user input will be formatted in the output on the page. It's worth noting that live preview was discussed as a potential feature really 5 years ago in the Drupal community in the context of features that Drupal could adopt from competing CMS solutions. User testing identified live preview as a feature of Craft CMS that users particularly like, and Contentful is a headless CMS that also offers a live preview. Now, the work that's underway in Same Page Preview is intended to eventually make its way into core, so trying it out now and providing feedback is a great way to help shape what could be a selling feature for a future Drupal update. So let's talk about Same Page Preview.
Burning question, Martin. Burning question. Does it only supports coupled Drupal sites, correct?
Today it does. There is an issue open around having it support headless sites as well. And I believe there are at least one, maybe a couple of contrib solutions that offer a similar sort of, side-by-side preview for live editing.
This is super. I mean, at least to me, this is super exciting. I'm finding in working with my current headless project and just in thinking in past of like preview solutions for Drupal, and like it feels like we've kind of missed like a opportunity to build a more robust preview solution. And I feel like this kind of like is working to fill that gap and hopefully like, push that kind of into make that a more modern experience for folks. I feel like we could probably have a whole show talking about preview and how it's sometimes pretty difficult in Drupal, or at least I feel like it is. This seems like really good work to make it nicer, make it better for folks.
Well, it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, I was going to say, this seems like the kind of thing that really could fast track it to core. I mean, it's not a feature that I particularly would probably use, but it's definitely something that content editors kind of love. Being able to see what it looks like before they publish it is something that people are always asking for. And the current kind of Drupal preview, as kind of John and you both alluded to, the current preview functionality in Drupal is dated and kind of painful. And I'm really impressed at the speed at which that this is moving. I'm curious why there's a 1.0 and a 2.0 branch if it's only like 6 weeks old. Maybe 1.0 is kind of just a
breaking changes. Maybe we'll talk about that later with Mike Miles.
I was going to say, there's probably some relevant discussion today that might inform, the future versioning of this module as well.
Exactly. For sure, we can dive into some of the reasons why they might have done that.
Question on Layout Builder. Does it support Layout Builder and seeing preview for Layout Builder stuff?
Ooh.
So I've tested it with content types that have Layout Builder set as sort of the way the content type is templated. I don't know that there's necessarily a use case for sort of trying to see a live preview while you're making layout changes, because Layout Builder sort of gives you a preview anyway. But definitely, if you've taken your article content type and use Layout Builder to put some fields on the side, then as you use same page preview, you'll actually see, as a content author, the content going in all the places where Layout Builder has put those.
Yeah, because I can see that. I feel like Nick's onto something there. Like I can see that as a big selling point for this, to be able to say like, hey, I built this page and I changed this layout, and here's how it's going to look when I hit save and I publish it. So that's definitely, I think, going to be pretty useful.
Yeah, 5 years ago when they did some of the discussion around competing CMSs, there was actually a blog post that was published by Evolving Web, and there's a link in the show notes about that. But it was interesting because it talked about how live preview seemed to give content authors a little more confidence in terms of like their ability to use the CMS, because they were seeing sort of that immediate feedback as well.
Yeah, I just think of like editing pages, and like I never use like the native preview functionality in Drupal because it just feels painful to me. I'd much rather just save the page and like reload it in a separate tab, right? Which again, from a usability standpoint, feels painful to me, but it's far easier than the preview functionality. So if we can get this in a good place and get it possibly into core, I feel like it could be a good replacement for some of that, or all of it, maybe. I don't know.
One last question that I have is, if the title field is the only one that's kind of auto updating at the moment, is there like a preview button you still have to push to kind of refresh after changing content, or?
So the title field is the only one that actually updates live as you type. The other ones, as soon as the field loses focus, the preview will refresh.
Oh, so you don't have to actually take an action other than lose focus. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, one more question then. Go ahead, Jordan.
No, so and when it refreshes, like do you have things like the background color and the front end font, from the theme, and is it all rendered and all of that splendor? Okay, that's kind of
exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Martin is shaking his head in the affirmative for those folks who are listening.
How does it handle autocomplete fields? Because that's one, like, having to lose focus on like when you're tagging something is painful? Does it work on like the entity, what is it, entity autocomplete action 2, or should I create an issue for that?
Definitely test it out and post an issue. I can say that I've used it with things like image fields. And so there is a little bit of, because an image field, when you load the image, it actually sort of refreshes with sort of a nested element. And so there is sort of an interim step there where it will lose focus, it'll throw a validation message, and then once you provide alt text as an example, then it'll refresh again, and now you see the image there with the alt text and all those things as well. So there's probably some refinement still that can be done for some of those use cases, but yeah, by all means, any of that feedback would be valuable.
I imagine there's some complexities there with revisioning, and then like if you have a lot of pre-processing in your theme that's based on the content being saved already, I'm sure there's challenges there for the team to figure out.
Yeah, no doubt. There's definitely going to be some challenges yet to solve, but so far, because it works through Drupal's sort of standard theming layer, it seems to work pretty well.
And then factor in the workflows, draft states, and all of those other fun things that people like to throw at it. Yeah, previews a complex, thorny topic, and I give Chris Bryan and Offer a lot of credit for jumping in and trying to make it a better experience.
And to build on Mike's point, that means that they're essentially loading both themes at the same time too, right? So I'm sure that
it's like a viewer of the other theme, right?
It actually loads it in an iframe. So it's got the front end theme in an iframe inside the admin theme if you're using a separate admin theme for content creation. So technically, yes.
Okay, that works.
Well, thanks, Martin. As always, that was a very interesting look at the same page preview module. Alrighty, as we alluded to in just a few minutes ago, today we're talking about semantic versioning, and Mike Miles, you've actually done a couple of talks on this topic, and wondering if we're gonna start off with, as we like to say here, a softball question. Wondering if you can just describe what semantic versioning is for folks that are listening.
Yeah, John, of course I can. So semantic versioning, it's just a numbering system that has been used for decades in software. So if you look at any operating system, any browser, any application and software you use, they most likely use semantic versioning for their numbering system. And what it just tracks is the degree of changes that have happened between code base, like changes in a code base. So it's a way to quickly identify if there's been very small, insignificant changes, if there have been minor changes, or if there have been major changes that may break backwards compatibility with a previous version. And it's just a standard way that software numbers those changes, so it makes it easier for people to recognize differences.
I think probably maybe the one people are most familiar with maybe is your iOS version, right? There's always they follow a semantic versioning practice there where it's like, hey, you're on iOS 16. Well, if you're on 16.4.1, you now have the ability to do this fun thing. Anything before that, you're SOL. That's kind of where my mind goes to when I think of semantic versioning. I don't know that the average person is checking their browser semantic version, but I don't know, maybe they are.
But right, every time you update, your Firefox or whatever, it'll say, hey, you're using version 32.7.11. And just to clarify for anyone who's not familiar, the structure of a semantic versioning number, it's a group of 3 numbers separated by periods. So you have your major number followed by a period, your minor number followed by a period, and then your patch number. So like version 1.0.0, 1.4.5, etc.
So sorry, Mike, you just said something there, and I want to clarify a little bit. It's three numbers separated by periods, but like those numbers themselves aren't necessarily they're not necessarily like one
Single
digit, two
digits,
digit,
right.
3 digit, right? They could be like any number of digits, right?
Right. So it's x.y.z, and those can be. I don't know how I've seen ones to be triple digits, but I've never seen any like higher than that usually.
Yeah, that seems nutty to me. I don't even know how anybody manages that, but
Well, you do have some projects that also add. I don't know what the fourth number would be, but we just mentioned Chrome or Firefox, for example. They'll have 4 different numbers, and I think the last one is like build number or something, and that very often is a really long string of numbers. Like for example, I'm currently on Chrome 110.0.5481.177. So I think some of these bigger organizations where they have potentially hundreds of developers on one project, they very quickly get much larger version numbers than something that we might be typically working on.
Yeah, and that's known as Nick. That's known as build metadata for semantic versioning number. So it's technically not part of the semantic versioning number structure, but they do recognize. There's a website semver.org that has all the information about semantic versioning, and so they have that. If it's the dash alpha or those dash build numbers, it's build metadata.
we will put a link to that in the show notes for anybody that's listening that's like, what are these guys talking about semantic versioning?
So we now know what semantic versioning is, that there's actually a spec for it. Why is it important? Why isn't it good enough just to say this is version 1, this is version 2, this is version X, Y, Z? Why do we have to have a whole a name for it and a spec for it?
I think it's important, and this is my opinion, because since it's a standardized system that a lot of software uses, it makes it easier for you and your team. Let's say if we in the scope of a Drupal project, let's say, to recognize and understand if a change, an upgrade is going to break your site potentially. So think about with Drupal, you get a module and all the modules pretty much now follow semantic versioning numbers. If they've released version 2.0 of their module and you're using version 1.0 or 1.00, you're pretty confident that means there are breaking changes. So that's more caution than you just apply that update and release it to your production. Like you probably want to put more testing into that. So that's why I think it's important, because it gives you the context about what sort of changes you're applying to your code base, or if you're writing modules or other software that you're putting out there, that your users can understand quickly the degree of changes you're making, so they can properly plan on how to implement the updates.
Yeah, it's like a common communication method between development teams, right? So that like if Mike's developing something and he comes out with a breaking change, I know that, hey, that's going to be version 3 as opposed to version 2, right? So I can say, oh, that's going to probably break some stuff. I got to look at it a little bit harder than I might look at a 2.0.1 release or something like that.
Because can you imagine if like every library or software you use, if they all had their own numbering system, that you had to learn every single one to understand if you could apply the update? That'd be madness.
I want everybody to pause the podcast right now. Go to your Drupal composer.json file, and then just imagine what Mike just said. Imagine each one of those has its own versioning scheme going on. Okay, now start the podcast again.
Yeah.
I think too, it's not just the amount of testing and stuff that goes into it. It's also how much time you think you'll allocate for it. So if you, again, think about going from Drupal 9.5.5 to 9.5.6 or something, right? That's probably, a 15 minutes of like local checking and stuff. And then you run your CI and do some testing and staging, right? 9.2 to 9.3 was a much bigger change. I mean, that's the famous config update, where you had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of config file updates because they forced an ordering. But going from 9 to 10, that's going to be, not as much as building a site from scratch, but it's, probably 10, 20, 30 hours, depending on how complex your site is, to update all the stuff that you need to update to go from 9 to 10. Another thing that I think is really important about it is it makes it easier for modules to pin their own dependencies. So, for example, if they're using a library and that library updates and does backwards breaking changes, their implementation is going to break, because they can say, hey, I built this pointing at version 5. So if version 6 comes out for that library, some project isn't going to accidentally get that because I've said I need version 5. So it's not just about it's about communicating that information, but it's also about allowing you to specify that when you're writing a project.
Yeah, and then especially like going back to your project's composer file, right? Because it's a standardized structured number system, it makes it easier. These systems have been built where you can target those specific versions. And it makes it easier to do that.
Yep.
Plus, we might talk about later about how you can then track and target different versions to upgrade that are safe to upgrade to.
So, Mike, when I was updating something recently, I like in Drupal, I'd like the 3 number system that you talked about, x.y.z. And I see that some modules still have in Drupal a structure of their version that's like 8.x dash 5.6 or something like that. And I think that might be 5.6.0, for example, in the x.y.z. Are we ever going to get away from 8.x-ness in Drupal modules, do you think?
I would hope so. I think a lot of them now, especially the ones that have really utilized the GitLab or GitHub code bases, they rely on those semantic version numbers, and it's just the version that's on Drupal uses the 8.x dash version.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope we move eventually everybody gets to using semantic versioning, just because, again, it's straightforward and easy to understand. And the 8.x flavor is kind of Drupal's own little thing. I'm sure it's based on something. I don't have all the insights, obviously, but
as I understand it, and maybe my understanding is not accurate, which is very possible, but as I understand it, it's up to the module maintainers, right, to switch to a more semantic versioning of their module, right? So at any point in time, a module you are using could go from 8.x or dash whatever to 3.0.0 if they so desired, right? I personally, because I'm, anal retentive and I like everything to fit in a box, would like us to all go in the way of semantic versioning for our modules, because it doesn't pin it to a version of Drupal, right? So now we have a situation. I actually just installed a module the other day where I installed the 8.x version of the module, but it was actually for Drupal 9.5.
Mm-hmm.
And like in my brain, I was like, that's funny. And didn't even really think about it just until just now. And just we were while we're having this conversation, but like, that's an instance where somebody new to Drupal or like somebody down the road is going to be real confused when they get to Drupal 11 and they're installing something that's 8.x, whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
So
I feel like when we went from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, it was really important to have that numbering system, because there was like no compatibility between those 2 major versions in Drupal, or very little. But going from 9 to 10, it's going to be totally different. There are going to be some modules that are going to be compatible with both major versions.
Yeah. I also want to point out that, because this was brought up by one of our listeners the last time we talked about semantic versioning on a show, the 8.x versions are semantically versioned. The packages keeps all those semantically. So even though they're labeled as 8.x, it doesn't mean that they're not following the semantic versioning guidelines. It just means that there's like a mapping layer, I think, that happens in order to.
Yeah, there's some internal logic that does that.
But it would be nice to have the facade match the actual semantic version.
I'm more worried about it making sense in my brain and not like,
Yeah.
you know, my brain doesn't have that abstraction layer where I'm like, oh, 8.x really means 2.3.5. Okay.
Especially to the point, Jordan and John, that you both made, is that, you know, moving it away from a specific version of Drupal that say a module supports, it's, if every module now is using Composer, right, then it has a dependency on the semantic version of Drupal that it supports.
Right.
And so you could have that in there, and then your versioning number for your module is all about the changes in your module.
Yep.
It gets me like, I don't know, it makes me super excited for like the future of Drupal, this topic, because like it's very exciting. Like I used to be I come from like the 4.7 days where like everything was like, oh, you have to use this module or that module, right? And Jordan just mentioned it with like Drupal 7, Drupal 8, but like it's very exciting to me to see that Drupal is moving in a direction where like we can go from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10 and Drupal 10 to Drupal 11 and Drupal, 11 to 25 into the future, and then like see a module structure that follows that. And, it makes it, I don't know, it's very exciting to me, but maybe I'm the only one. All right. I have a question. We talked about, semantic versioning, X dot Y dot Z, or maybe that was reverse. Anyway, I'm wondering how alphas, betas, and RCs fall into the mix there, Mike. How do you handle those?
Yeah, so those in the semantic versioning definition, they are supported as an extension to it. So they're like pre-release versions. So they're denoted by a dash or a hyphen, and then a series of identifiers like alpha 1 or alpha.1 or beta.2, whatever. Those indicate that version is unstable and may not be compatible for other uses. So that's why I think people are always cautious about using alphas and betas. Obviously, that means they're unstable, and so for semantic versioning, that's what it means as well. So that's why with Composer, when you want to use an alpha version, like you have to explicitly usually say, like, I want to use this unstable version.
I think everybody set their minimum stability to dev at some point of time, right? I'm wondering, do you have any insight as to, so it's like number dot number dot number, and then it's dash alpha dot number. Is there a reason that they kind of like went with that structure instead of doing like, dash alpha dash number or something like that?
I don't know why they do it as like alpha dot number. Probably just to follow along with like being able to count up numerically.
Got it. Cool. I didn't know if there was any.
I'm sure there is, but these standards have been out for a long time, so
yeah,
I don't know what it is.
Do you know anything about the standards group? Like who manages that? I mean, I know a lot of the stuff is managed on GitHub, which a lot of these kind of specs are kind of handled something like that. But do you know anything about the people behind it?
So I do know that semantic versioning, the specification for it, was authored by Tom Preston Werner. So he's the inventor of Gravatar and a co-founder of GitHub. Right now, it has a Creative Commons license, which is why everyone can use it. So I'm not sure which group still is like kind of in charge of updating this the structure for it, because right now semantic versioning is on version 2.0.0 of the standard. So I don't know what group is actually in charge of it at this point. They do have a GitHub repo for it, though, where you can open up issues for semantic versioning numbering system, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah. Like the fact that a numbering system has enough thought, that enough thought has to go into a numbering system that it warrants an issue queue is fascinating. But the truth is, it does. Like, how do you resolve conflicts? How do you make decisions like alphas and such?
What's far more interesting to me is the fact that the semantic versioning numbering system actually uses semantic versioning. So like they're on 2.0.0, which is like kind of
change.
kind of messes with my head a little bit, because I'm like, okay, like say you started at 1.1.0 or 1.0.0 dash beta, right? And now they're on 2.0.0, like How do you get that? How do you communicate that out to people? Like, hey, we're changing how semantic versioning works. Like, here, read this page, I guess, is how you do that, right?
Yeah, I'm curious how long the version 2 has been out. Like when it came out. Actually, I could probably see 10 years. It's been version 2.0 for 10 years now. So
okay, well that seems pretty all right then. I guess we don't have to worry about that.
Pretty
that's
stable.
the thing with semantic versioning numbers, right? Is that the degree of changes they indicate, like major changes don't happen that often. Like not Drupal 9 to 10. That only comes a number of years apart. And semantic versioning, I guess it's like every decade or so for a major change.
Yep. So we've talked about some of the benefits for like defining dependencies or like communication, but how does semantic versioning help keep a development team working on a project organized? How does it help you in the development process?
So I think it depends on what type of project your team's working on. Obviously, if you're working on a module or a theme that you're releasing or a library that you're releasing out to the public, using semantic versioning is going to help you inform your users the degree of changes you're making, as we've covered. I think it gets a little harder when you're talking about like websites and like building things with Drupal. And numbering, using semantic versioning to keep track of your changes, just because in terms of Drupal, everything's very complex. You use a lot of different modules and components. And so how do you accurately measure when you're releasing like the newest version of your Drupal website, what your semantic version change should be? And I've had conversations with people at conferences about this, but for my team, it helps us keep track of, are we releasing a major update? Like, are we upgrading from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10? Then we're going to upgrade our semantic version number of our platform or our code base just to align with that.
I think it also depends on how many people are using it too, right? Like I don't typically, for most one-off projects, I don't typically follow semantic versioning super closely for themes, right? But if it's a theme that you're distributing to multiple sites, then 100% you're using semantic versioning. Even if you control all the sites, because sometimes one site will be on a different version and you want to be able to see what's changed if it's on an older version or something, or be able to pin to an older version if something broke on one of the sites, so that you can fix it in a future release. Same kind of thing with Drupal projects. I tend to find like I'll follow the semantic guidelines a little bit looser on an individual project. And for me, it's more about making sure the change log is readable and try to kind of give myself some guidelines. But again, if it's a single project, I'm not going to worry so much about if it should be a point release or a minor release, right? Because ultimately it's not being distributed to other people. For me, it's about readability of the change log.
Nick, are you saying that you semantic version your personal projects?
Personal projects, some of them, not all of them.
Wow,
but again,
that's dedication, man. I applaud you for that.
But I should clarify. Like I said, it's not like, so like a library system that I'm deploying to many sites. That's semantic version, right? And it's very strict because other development teams are going to depend on that, and dozens and dozens of sites are going to use it. A personal site, I mean, if I get a point release wrong or mixed up with a minor release, it doesn't really matter. But as long as I can go through the changelog and release notes and see like on this date this changed and kind of what version am I on, and maybe see like a staging environment versus my production environment, right? But yeah, I'm not like sitting there like sweating bullets trying to figure out if something should be a major release or not for personal projects. It's just easier.
I was going to say, Nick, I agree on using it as like a history tracker. So one of the ways my team and I use semantic versioning is if we've noticed something broke on our site, which luckily doesn't happen that often, but looking through our release tags, we can be like, all right, well, the last time we released anything that was a minor release, anything that wasn't trivial, was like this date. So that might be a good indication of when we changed something to then look further in our notes for that release about what we changed versus we applied a patch update to fix like a spelling mistake or something.
Yeah. Mike, I have a question about how your team specifically is using semantic versioning, around staying organized, right? So are you guys typically working on one version of the site at a time? So one semantic release at a time, or are you potentially working on multiple, like, oh, hey, this part of the team is working on, 3.0.0, and this part of the team is working on 3.5.0 or something like that?
So the way we use semantic versioning, and we manage a number of sites. We have our main website is a Drupal website, which is on Drupal 9 right now, and then we have a WordPress website as well. But we use semantic versioning for our release process, really, and for tagging our code base. And so to answer that, it's one at a time, and it's when we're doing a production release, we create in our Git repository, we create a tag with a semantic versioning number based off the degree of changes we've made. So like I did a release this morning where it was a accessibility update we made, and so that was a patch release for us. So I updated that third number just to the next iteration.
So it's less about like putting features into a release, and it's more about packaging and sending it out when it's ready.
Yeah, and again, like to Nick's point about being personal projects, it's a small team that works on this, so it's not, the code base isn't public, so it's really that we have some leeway to determine, is it a patch release or is it a minor release or is it a major release? I think major release is more structured than anything else. But in Drupal, it gets hard because
you can't roll
if you're going to because it's a major release says there's backwards breaking function changes. So if you update a field, like if you remove a field from a content type, that's going to change your database. So that's technically a backward breaking change because it's really hard to revert that once you release it. But we're not going to do a major release every time we add a field or remove a field from a content type. We'd make those, depending on the degree of changes, like a minor or patch release. So I think it's how, in Drupal, it's how you and your team want to track those changes, how they impact your users of your Drupal website, is how I think about it. Like, is this really going to change the editor experience or not?
I guess I've typically looked at it as like kind of the same way you just said, right? Where like adding or removing a field from a content type is probably a minor release change. But like, I look at like those big breaking changes as like, hey, we're doing a full site redesign, or we're rewriting this functionality completely, and like it will not continue to work the same way ever again. Right.
But that's technically not true though, because like, for example, to Mike's point, but extrapolating a bit, if you pull down the most recent version of web form and it runs 30 database updates and completely restructures it, you can't really roll back from that without a database restore or a ton of work. So technically that's a breaking change. but nobody's going to implement their major version of that.
I don't know. I think it's splitting hairs a little bit. Like, you are not wrong. It is a breaking change, but I mean, it's easy enough these days to replace a database and re-import configuration to get back to where you were prior. Right.
I mean, I think some of it too is what's the pathway to fix it? Because honestly, if something broke with web form, I'm not restoring the database. I mean, I would either rebuild the web forms or, work in issue queue to find a fix and an update that will fix the current one, right? So I think that's some of it too. Like, what's the pathway to resolving? If the bug happens, what's the pathway to resolving it, right?
Right. So I mean, like, you have to look at, like, for like an e-commerce site where data is being written to the database pretty regularly, right? You're going to be less likely to want to do a restore of a database. But if it's a static marketing site, you might be like, there's a content freeze in place. Like, we're going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Mike, you know an awful lot about this, and I'm hearing you describe how your team uses semantic versioning internally and so on. Just curious, how long have you been, focused on or working with semantic versioning?
I think I started using it around the time Drupal 8 came out, when we started really using Composer, because then I had to learn about it, right? Because before then it was kind of download modules and install them, and that's when I got into it and started using it. Just one, to understand it, so I knew what at the time I was working in digital marketing, so I was working on client websites. So I wanted to know what I was doing to my clients' websites. And then in starting really to do module development, especially trying to build like composer packages that then I could consume in my Drupal projects or I could use elsewhere, like on WordPress, I started using semantic versioning then. So it's been a number of years. And I think I've gotten more used to it, and I've tried to apply it more to my work just because of the standards and the ease of understanding things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's something to be said for standardization too. Like even if it's a little bit more effort on an individual case, just having a common language across all projects makes it overall makes it easier. And if people are coming in to work with you or work for you, this is something that industry wide, especially in Drupal now, people generally understand. So you don't have to sit down and explain to them, what the process is. You might have some, especially on smaller teams and stuff, you might have some edge cases or little tweaks, or where do you draw the line, minor versus patch, right? But in general, people working in Drupal as developers are going to understand semantic versioning. So you don't have to explain that. If it's the third Wednesday of the month, we're going to, add a V in front of the version, and if this person's doing the release, they're going to do that, right? You just have a standard that people can get used to.
Yeah, it's the same idea behind using coding standards, right? The reason why you set up your editor with like the Drupal coding standards is so that your code looks the same as all the others. And then in turn, you can understand when you have to look under the hood of a module you're using, you can understand it.
Yep.
So, Mike, I want to talk a little bit about your talk at Nerd Summit, which was not specifically about semantic versioning, right? It was at a super high level. It was about being okay with deleting your code, doing certain code cleanup activities, right? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that talk, and then explain how semantic versioning kind of can help with that code cleanup.
Yeah, so a quick summary of that talk is that you shouldn't be afraid to delete obsolete code from your code base. I've, in my practice, in my experience, have seen, and I've done it myself, like being worried about deleting code in case you need to put it back. So you comment out code, and then you find files in your code base with like huge chunks of commented out code. That just decreases the readability, makes it harder to understand, makes it harder to optimize. So being comfortable with removing code that is no longer serving a purpose in your code base is beneficial to you as a developer and your team. I think using semantic versioning with that could help with that is what we've talked about, how the different version numbers indicate the amount of changes. And Drupal itself is a good example of this. Is if you have a minor release that indicates, hey, some code may have become obsolete or deprecated, but it's still in the code base. But when we move to the next major version, we're deleting that deprecated code. So that's a good indicator that in your project, if we're going to do a major release, this is an opportunity to delete all the code we've identified as obsolete instead of just leaving it in place in case we need to get it back. Because you're saying there's going to be something that breaks when you upgrade to this version and this old code's not available.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting and kind of important. Like, I think one of the things that I took away from that too was like, there are security implications there. If you have code that's just kind of like dormant, that may not be commented out, it's just not really used, right? I think being able to say through semantic versioning, like, hey, we refactored this, or hey, we took this out completely because it wasn't being used anywhere, really allows for for folks to keep their code bases kind of lean, clean, and mean. If you agree, don't agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is the second episode in a row we talked about deleting code, so that's a first, I think.
We should just delete all the code.
Yeah, in that talk, just one last point about it is I do talk about the different ways people try to avoid deleting code. And like I said, there's one that is commenting out, which is out of the two options, the better approach, because then it can't be accessed. But other people, then you just write code around your old code and you leave that code in place, which, John, like you said, that's a security issue.
So are there any additional benefits to semantic versioning? For example, one of the things that comes to mind for me is it helps a lot with project planning. So for example, if you have something that you know is going to be a breaking change, it with clients that follow semantic versioning, it's helpful to be like, hey, that's a breaking change. Let's put that on the milestone for 2.0 or 3.0. So you group, it really helps you group a lot of those breaking changes together so the people consuming your code aren't constantly like having to do major upgrades to their integrations or APIs or whatever. You want to try to minimize that pain. So if you do maybe 1 or 2 breaking change releases a year, depending on the project, that's probably okay. But if you're doing it every single week, people are going to be cursing you, right? So are there other benefits to semantic versioning that we haven't touched on?
Well, I think the one that you mentioned, Nick, is a good point. Is for that project planning stage of your project, whatever it is, that you can think months ahead of time. Like if you work on like a yearly project plan, that you could say, okay, we know, for example, like Drupal 10 is coming out, or Drupal 9 is no longer receive updates by November. So by then we want to go to Drupal 10. So that's when we're going to plan our next major update. So what else do we need to do to get there, and how can we plan out the path to get there? So that's where I see one of the benefits is it helps you plan those degree of changes in your project, and then rally all the resources around it that you need to. I'm not sure what else. I mean, yeah, that's a good one.
So Mike, other than the basics of that you've been describing, what other ways does your team at MIT use semantic versioning, like for CI or regression testing, or what other ways are you using it?
So the major way we use semantic versioning on my team is for our CI/CD process. So we do almost daily releases, and the way we do that, just give some insight, is we use Jira, and so whoever's the release manager for the week, we check what for that day, what tickets are ready to go out. We determine, hey, are these minor changes, patch changes, major changes, and if they're, depending on that, we merge those in. And then the way we do our release process is we have a little script we write, but basically we create a Git tag that says, all right, here's version 3.15.5. And when we create that tag, we have processes in Circle CI that kicks off, because it's a very known pattern. So we can have a build process in our Circle CI config that says, if there's a tag that fits a semantic version number, do these deployments steps. So that's how it does a production deployment. And what it will do first is it will do a test of the deployment on our dev environment, make sure that all works, and then we'll push it upstream and do it on our production environment, so that we can have different build processes for when we open up pull requests, or we have other tags that we know won't push to production, because production is only triggered based off of a semantic version tag being created.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
So how often do you guys review that process? Like, for example, do you maybe quarterly or monthly look at all the releases and discuss like, oh, hey, we made this a minor release, but maybe these types of things should be a patch release in the future, or vice versa? Like, is that something just week to week or as needed you talk about, or do you ever actually go back and kind of check your notes and have that discussion?
We have that discussion, I think, not how often. I wouldn't say weekly, but it's kind of gets back into when it's a internal project. It's kind of like an art form about what type of release it's going to be. And so it's depending on what tickets are ready to go out. We have a feel of the team, like, should this be it's really, the discussion is, should this be a patch or should this be a minor release? Major releases don't happen that often. So because if it's Drupal and we know technically it could all be breaking changes, it's more about, hey, we're just updating field definitions, we're changing something in the theme, let's just make this a patch release and push it out. And that's the majority of what we do is patch releases. So it's more of an organic conversation that we have.
What about the person doing the ticket? Is it, or the task, is it on them to also make a suggestion and be like, hey, this is the bigger change, it definitely should be a minor release, not a patch? Or is it really just release managers kind of really reading the notes and trying to figure that out?
It's a little of both. So I think it's when we have a ticket that turned out to be like a lot more work than we thought, and we had to write some database update hooks, and there's going to be more significant under the hood changes, the person doing the work brings that up, and then we say, hey, this should probably be a minor release. We may even want to do it off hours just in case. That doesn't happen that often, luckily. But most of the time it's up to the release manager, which is why on my team, we rotate every week who's the release manager for the week. So everyone has experience doing it. So it's not just, me with the understanding of what should be minor and what should be a patch.
Have you guys ever seen an instance where a Drupal security release has like increased your semantic version? Like, oh, this is just going to be a patch release this week. Well, wait, nope, never mind. Now it's a minor release.
Usually not, because if our semantic version number is dictated by the Drupal release number. So if we're doing a security release from Drupal, that's usually a patch release. So we're just going to update our version as a patch number. If it's a minor update to Drupal, we're going to update our minor. And then like when we move from 9 to 10, which we're working on now, we're going to do a major release of our code base.
Got it. So I want to actually jump back for a second to Nick was asking about other benefits of semantic versioning. And Mike, I was actually wondering, does your team use semantic versioning outside of like your team? And what I mean by that is like, are you using it with like stakeholders to get them excited about like feature releases and stuff like that? Or is it more of just a method for kind of like tracking changes?
It's more of a method for tracking changes. We do announce our releases every day. We have a Slack channel that a lot of the MIT Sloan community who's related to the website is part of. So we'll say, hey, we're doing a release. Here's the release number. And we indicate what changes there are. But most of the time, people just care about what the changes are and the more descriptive release notes. So it's really for us. This is why one of the drawbacks from this then is that people who aren't technical don't really understand the numbering system, like who pays attention to their browsers updated the number of it.
Right.
So I see other groups use like date releases instead of semantic versioning for this purpose because people more care about when it's going out and then what changes are part of that.
Yeah, the reason I ask is the project that I'm working on right now is more of like a platform and like people are on it. So like we basically tag major features to certain versions so people can see the calendar, see the version. So we're kind of using semantic versioning to build excitement, similarly to I guess how Drupal does it, right? And many open source projects to build excitement around the fact that like, oh, in like 3.0, we're going to get this cool new feature. But we're only at 2.5. So we got a couple of releases to go there.
Yeah. So we do that for our major releases. Like we're starting, like I said, we're planning out our move from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10. And one of the changes for there is obviously the admin theme with Claro. And so we have a lot of editorial users who we can't just release that on them. They're going to be like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Right? CK Editor 4 to CK Editor 5. What are you doing to me?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that will also, because we have a lot of editorial staff. And so that's one of the ones where we're going to plan out to be like, all right, version 4 of our platform. These are some of the changes to get ready for, because there's a lot of visual changes for the editors. From a technical standpoint, it's not that big of a deal, but visually it's going to be a big change for them. So we want to get them prepared and we can plan for that.
Yep.
Makes sense.
That makes sense. So we're kind of talking about semantic versioning, right? From a standpoint of like, hey, it's always been here and we're just starting with it. And that's the way we're moving forward. I'm wondering if you have any pointers for somebody who might be listening to this, who isn't currently using semantic versioning on their existing project and they want to start. Is it simply something where you go, okay, starting next Monday, this is 1.0.0, like, and we're doing it from here on out? Or is it something that you want to put, more rules and regulations or structure around?
I think it depends on the team. Obviously, this is a discussion to have with your team about wanting to do this. And I've had similar questions like this come up when I've given talks on semantic versioning. And I think if you just want to switch to do it, pick a time. I'm going to assume you're using Git repository. Pick a time to do it and then tag it with version 1.0.0 and don't try to like back tag everything, even though you could technically do that. But if it's an internal project, you don't need to do that. If it's a project you're working on that hasn't been released, maybe it's a library you want to release or something that's not just a personal website, you could start switching to using a semantic version number that's below version 1, which means it's in development. So version 0.0.1, 0.0.0.9, etc. And you can start doing that now. And then that way, when you're ready to do your first production release, whatever that is for your project, then you can move to version 1. But it's talk about your team when they're ready to make this change. You don't have to build CI/CD processes in place. Really, you just need an understanding of how you want to track these changes, what makes sense for a patch release, for a minor release, and then just pick the next version you're going to do and make it version 1 and then move from there.
Yeah, the nice thing about a tag that I don't think a lot of people really know is it's a point in time snapshot of your code essentially, and it's not, I don't think it's technically completely unchangeable, but it's a lot more unchangeable than a branch, right? If you just make a new branch for a release, like they're a lot more mutable. Like they can be changed, they can be deleted, and of course you can delete tags, and there are ways to technically change tags, but it takes a lot more effort. So the nice thing about having a tagged release is it's very easy to, if you need to look at the specific state of code at that time when that release was done, tags are the way to do that. So even if you're not using that in your CI/CD process for automatically deploying, it's good for having that reference point.
It's also, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't a lot of like get the repo solutions, GitLab, GitHub, so on and so forth, like they have permissions for people who can like create and delete tags, right? So like that's also a method for you to, like, obviously, you know, Mike said that he has a release manager on his team who rotates, but like some groups have like a release manager, and that's their job, is to manage that release. Like that person can have the permission over the creating of those and deleting of those if need be.
That's also the challenge with semantic versioning. If you're going to do it more specifically on a project that you're releasing to the public, like a Drupal module or a composer package, is because the version says it's a certain state of your code base. As soon as that version is out, if it's a public project, you can't take it back. You have to assume, like, as soon as you release a module update, you have to assume someone's already downloaded it. So you can't be like, oh, I forgot to commit this file that's supposed to be part of it. Well, guess what? You have to do another release. And so that's why you want to be extra cautious and make sure you know that everything's ready to go and what version you're going to update, so that you don't mess it up.
A lot of tools also expect that tag. So for example, I have clients that have private modules, right? They're custom modules for their projects, and those modules get released to multiple sites. So we want to use packages because why not? And packages, you can configure it so it basically looks at your repository, and if something is tagged, it packages it up and puts it on the private packages, and you can now access that from all the other sites. And you know, it's fast. Like you tag a release, and 3 seconds later, your sites can pull that new version down from your private packages. So if you're looking to build some custom projects into your workflow and integrate with a tool like packages, they build on that.
There's also some other cool tools depending on specifically with Git, what repositories use. I know there's a GitHub action where, based on keywords in your commit history, it will determine what the next semantic release should be. So that's helpful if you work with a big team and everyone's committing. If you start your commit message with patch or minor or major, when you do your release, it will check through all your commit history from the previous release and determine what the highest version is, and then it'll increment it for you. So that's a helpful tool that a team could use.
If we're gonna move a little bit more general, we're not talking about a specific project, but somebody's really interested in making decisions about how people version their projects, and somebody wanted to learn more about semantic versioning and maybe get involved with that project, where should they go?
So the website to go to is semver.org. So that's semver.org. And it's available in lots of different languages if English isn't your primary language. And it has the whole summary of how semantic versioning works. what determines a major update, a minor update, a patch update, how those other metadata values should be structured. And then also shows the grammar for it, because it has a whole grammar for the numbering system that if you understand how to read that, you can read through that. And then it has a brief description about why to use semantic versioning. So I think that's the place to start. And maybe I should plug for my own talk that I have that we can link in the show notes on using semantic versioning with Git tags for managing code releases.
Yes, we are big fans of shameless self-promotion here. So you should definitely hawk your wares if you have them. Mike, as always, it's been super enlightening, and we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I'm always happy to come on Talking Drupal.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
You can get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, we have come to the end of our show, where we foster more shameless self-promotion. I would actually, before we jump into that, like to thank Mike Miles for giving me a great book recommendation. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Totally blanking on the name of the book and the author, but it was a book about leadership. I got it and started reading it, and it is very entertaining. So thank you, Mike, for that.
You're welcome. I'm trying to think which book it could be, because I know so many.
John, we can't mention that on the show and not mention the name. So do you want to take a second to find the name, and I'll edit out the pause.
Was it a specifically technical one, or was it a more general one?
It was. I think it was Michael Lopp. The
Michael Talking with Tech. No,
leadership. The one with the B on the cover. Hold on, I'll go get
it. Yeah. You that's one of the big rules in podcasting.
I'm guessing it's either Managing Humans or he said with the B, so it's The Art of Leadership. That's what it is by Michael Leadership.
Okay, so the book here, I have it here for those looking at the video, is The Art of Leadership by Michael Lopp. And I will say the one thing, and I think I mentioned this when I first brought it up on the show a couple of weeks ago, but one thing I like about it is our listeners know that I do not read quickly or at long periods of time. So this book is broken up into like nice bite-sized stories where you can like read like 5 or 6 pages, and it's like one kind of like aspect of leadership that you should focus on. So it's nice digestible pieces.
And his books are all just like, he's compiled his blog posts from his website, Rants and Repos. So if you want even shorter ones, just go to his blog, and then you can read his blog.
And there you go.
Which we can put in the show notes.
So, Mike Miles, if folks wanted to contact you to talk about leadership or semantic versioning or MIT Sloan, how could they go about doing that?
You could go to my website, mike-miles.com, and connect with me there. I have all my links to the various places. I'm Mike Miles 86 on the Drupal Slack. That's also, I think, for my LinkedIn too, is Mike Miles 86. But if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, be sure to tell me in your request why you want to connect, because if it's just no one says anything, then I'm not going to connect with you. So let me know why.
Awesome. Jordan, how can folks get a hold of you?
I'm CO Badger on Drupal.org, so you can connect with me there.
There you go. And I'm assuming you're in the Drupal Slack as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM. You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, as well as Drupal.org and Drupal Slack. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.